Today's episode is brought to you by the Consultancy Growth Network. As you'll know, I'm a big believer in learning from people who've achieved the things that you want to. It's why I run this podcast, to share the stories of consulting leaders and how they've got to where they are today. So when I started talking to Mark Jansen and the team at Consultancy Growth Network, it was clear there was an obvious fit between Climate Consulting and their mission and what they are building with their network. But you're probably asking, what is the Consultancy Growth Network? The Consultancy Growth Network is the leading community of boutique consulting leaders. It brings together seasoned consulting growth experts who successfully scaled their own boutiques, with rapidly growing consulting founders looking to emulate their success. Now, you might be thinking, who are these growth experts? What do they actually know about consulting? And this is one of the most exciting things that personally I find about the network. The team at the Consultancy Growth Network have searched far and wide for some of the best boutique consulting leaders to help their members on their journeys, some of which I have previously interviewed for this podcast, such as Don Morehouse and Augusto Negrillo. But it's not just the insights from these people that you will benefit from. By joining, you get access to their jam-packed calendar of regular in-person and online events, their comprehensive growth hub of resources, and their active Slack community. Through all of these channels, you can learn, solve challenges, and achieve the goals you want for your firm. And now, if that wasn't enough reason to sign up, the Consultancy Growth Network is giving all listeners to this podcast a special sign-up offer. If you join for 12 months, you join for that next year, you will get your 13th month for free, giving you that extra month to continue to build on everything you're learning and continue to benefit from the network. To sign up, just visit consultancygrowthnetwork.com or contact their partnerships director, Luke at consultancygrowthnetwork.com. And when you're talking about joining, mention Create Engage or Climate Consulting, and you will get that special sign-up offer. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Climate Consulting. In this one, I had the pleasure of chatting to Assad Ahmed, founder and CEO of Phase 3, the Manchester-based consultancy that provides professional and managed services across HR, payroll, and finance. As a born entrepreneur, Assad founded Phase 3 at a young age, and despite his self-proclaimed aversion to planning, he was able to successfully steer the company's growth, something he puts down to his ability to foster great relationships and his willingness to take a chance and back himself to succeed. Fast forward to today, and Phase 3 has over 100 employees across the UK and has built an award-winning culture, being named one of the UK's best places to work in consulting and professional services by Great Place to Work, something we discuss in detail in this episode. During this one, Assad and I talk all about Phase 3's remarkable journey and many of the unconventional steps that took him from door-to-door salesman to consulting CEO. We talk about the importance of taking action for aspiring entrepreneurs and how it was those first steps that led Assad to found Phase 3. We explore the unexpected consequences of winning a major new client and how winning their biggest deal actually held back Phase 3's growth. We talk about how Phase 3 managed through the financial crisis and the importance of its customer-centric approach for helping it to thrive as they came out of it. And as I mentioned, we discuss culture and the importance of building a strong culture and why Assad always puts his people first. Whether you are just starting your consulting journey or you're a seasoned pro, maybe even you're looking to start your own consultancy, this one will give you so much that you can take and apply straight away to help you in 2024 as you grow your career and your consultancy. So, with the intro done, all that's left to say is please enjoy today's conversation with Assad Ahmed. Assad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a real pleasure.
Not at all. We'll talk about everything in terms of how we've got to know each other. And I can see the Great Place to Work logo on your background, which is where I first came across Phase 3. But then it turns out we have a mutual friend, which, so that people keep listening, I might not share so that they can wait and find out who that is later in the series. Maybe to start us, Assad, before we go on to our mutual friend, for those who maybe don't know you so well, could you give your background and an overview of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Assad Ahmed, I'm the founder and CEO of Phase 3, and we are providers of professional and managed services across HR, payroll, and finance. So we get involved in things like HR system selection, implementation, project management. We provide managed payroll services, and so on. I've been doing this now for almost 20 years. Nick, will be 20 years in March 24.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. You can, well, I've got a lot of grey hairs. You probably can't see them, but I have. And I started kind of in various sales roles for a few years post-uni. And then kind of, I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say I stumbled across this industry. And yeah, here we are 20 years later.
Fantastic. I said, well, a lot for us to dive into. It certainly doesn't look like you've been in it 20 years, I have to say, in a good way.
Good genes.
Exactly. And I think I'd love to start with that origin story, because I'm always fascinated where I speak to people like yourself who've launched their own business, who's founded their business, and particularly given how long you've been running it, that origin story is fascinating. And you touched on there, you'd done sales roles for a few years before stumbling across HR, and I'll let you unpack that yourself. What was it that led you into sales originally? I know we talked about sort of you were at Queen Mary's in London and Mile End. I obviously spent some time there a little later than you, but lovely part of London, lots going on. What led you to go from there to say, right, I'm going into sales initially?
Do you know what, Nick? I wish there was some kind of one real story I could tell you about this, in terms of I really wanted to enter into sales and I saw it as my future and all of that. But it's actually not the case. I think in those days, going into like a sales, very much like a lot of people in this generation go into like a call center first, maybe whilst, part-time or this, because those roles are more readily available. It's not almost like a career choice at that point. And it certainly wasn't a career choice when I first started. I actually wanted to be a journalist at some point, kind of pre-uni. So that was what I did my work experience and stuff in. But I was always good at speaking with people. I had a background. My father came to the UK from Pakistan and, set up businesses here in convenience stores and all that kind of stuff. So I always knew, it was kind of subconsciously wired into us that we would always have, or you'd always run your own business. What that business was, I wasn't too fussed about at that point. And then I ended up in various sales roles post-university. I did things like sell fake perfume door to door, Nick.
And I assume that's what it sounds like on the tin, Assad. So like your Hugo Boss was actually a Hugo Dross and...
Absolutely, yeah. Gucci was, Poochie or something, or Coochie. God knows what it was. But I did that. And do you know what? Everything's a part of the journey, yeah? And I made some great friends, had some great times, and I was actually pretty good at it. But I was kind of knocking door to door, young kid, kind of ballsy, no care in the world. And I sold a bit, realized it was actually some kind of pyramid scam, and then walked away, did a little bit in terms of selling corporate hospitality for a company for 2-3 weeks, months, something like that. And then I fell across what I would call my first proper job, which was at a company called New Horizons in Manchester city centre, which was selling IT training courses. So Office courses, Microsoft certified developers, MCSEs, MCDs, all of that kind of stuff. And here's a bit where I promote my sales skills and talk about myself a little bit. I broke a few records whilst I was there in terms of month sales and highest the Manchester branches just opened. So we were like the first intake of staff. I did the highest ever recorded first month sales and broke a few more records as we began. And I just found that I was good at speaking to people over the phone, and I built rapport quite well and relationships and so on. And then did that for a little bit, but I was young and keen and eager, and I left there thinking I'm going to go on to much bigger and better things. But with zero planning, I didn't have another job to go into.
So you left, you just thought, I can find better than this, and I'm going to go.
Absolutely.
Go and do it.
I was very naive. I was living at home at the time. So, I didn't have any bills to pay or any kind of financial responsibilities, a few quid in the bank, and I was okay. And then my father was away at the time. He was abroad and he was coming back to the UK, and I wasn't working. I thought, oh God, if I'm not working, I'm just going to got a few lectures here and I better do something. And in those days, the sales jobs used to be in the Manchester Evening newspaper on a Thursday. So I applied for perhaps 4 or 5 jobs. I promise you, Nick, I didn't even know what I was applying for. Just applied for a few jobs. Ended up getting a job in Crewe, around kind of Crewe, Nantwich, for a company called Total Amber, which provided HR and payroll consultancy, kind of niche recruitment. And I was there, got that job, absolutely loved it. I was there for 3 years, great team. And the founder of that business, Alan O'Neill, became a bit of a kind of mentor to me in terms of I'd never seen that environment before. And it was very sales intensive, but he would treat us so well and always there for us. And honestly, like a mentor to me. And I was there for 3 years and I thought, I can do this myself, and that is how I started phase 3. I was at Total Amber for 3 years. I thought, I'm earning 10, 20% commission, whatever it was. I could do this for myself. And I then went out and set up phase 3 in March 2004.
Wow, that is quite an origin story, Assad. And I love the idea of going door to door selling fake perfume, but we probably won't spend too much longer on that. Or there's a conversation. I don't know if you didn't keep any of the bottles. I always find it's like when you get the Ray-Bans on holiday or the Fay-Bans.
Do you know what? I didn't, but I'm actually a bit of a fragrance snob now. Yeah, so I'm quite into my niche fragrances and stuff. So maybe there's some kind of link back to 20 odd years ago that's kind of resurfacing now, Nick. I don't know.
Look for the next phase 3 business shortly. Hey?
Yeah.
We were obviously talking before this about nurseries, which we might not come onto today, but there's lots in here, Assad. And I guess just a couple of bits, because it was intriguing. And I find, we'll talk all about kind of the journey you've been on with phase 3, because obviously this grounding in sales has been a phenomenal part of that success. But I always think it's interesting to open up, because our industry of consulting, people typically start from a consulting side where they don't sell until they are 20 years in. And sometimes that catches people off guard. So I'd love to get, you mentioned you went into this first firm, you broke records, day one or month one. And obviously at Total Amber, you did well. Kind of, what was it that you were doing differently to others? What was the thing that you were like, and you've probably thought about this, like what's the thing that you did that really differentiated you from those other salespeople that you were working with or, you were competing with in that respect?
Okay. I will say at this point, I think other people that I was working at also did very well as well. And I certainly learned from everybody around me. I think in those days, I was a little bit more empathetic towards people I was speaking with. I think there's a bit of a problem in sales in terms of the image, in that, you're selling to people, and that kind of conjures up images of used car salespeople or double glazing or something like that. And it isn't. It's just a process you're following. Like in all other areas of business, you're just following a set of processes. You speak to a customer, you're trying to add value, you're trying to help them. And that's what I tried to do. Don't get me wrong. Certainly in the early days, I had one eye on my commission as well. I think any good salesperson has to, really. But that's all I did. I just created relationships with people. I created rapport with people. I was young, fearless, and all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoyed what I was doing. A lot of people in sales don't enjoy it. Perhaps I was lucky in that the environments I was in were not too heavy in terms of being too target driven. And if you don't hit your target for 2 months, you're out. And I've heard stories from people I know, friends who've been in those environments. Well, mine was not quite as hardcore, so perhaps it gave me a little bit more time to bed in as well. But I just really enjoyed it, and I loved speaking to people.
I love your point around process as well there, Asa, because I think you're right. Sales does get a bad reputation, and for me, it was always the people who sold things around dinner time. I don't like that was the resounding memory in my household. It was always people who called around 6 or 7 p.m. and that was your parents would not want to speak to them because it was dinner time, and that was my perception of sales. And I think that has lingered. But to your point, actually, like in any consulting or in tech, you've got a process, and if you enjoy the process and can do it well, as you obviously can, that bears fruit. I think there's probably a lot for us to talk about in this, and I might save more till we get to the kind of actually running the business now in the different business areas. And so to bring us back to the stories as you told it, going out on your own in some ways is a really obvious thing to do. But in others, you're kind of 3 or so years out of university. You've got a bit of experience, but not tons, and suddenly going out to start your own business. Like, how did you do that? Again, for listeners thinking about doing that, like, what does that look like? And obviously, I guess that was 20 years ago as well. Kind of, if you were doing it now, would it be the same? Would you have done anything different? Like, what was that early period like?
It was great. I absolutely loved it. And I just went out and did it, Nick. I got on the phone. I'd learned everything. I took everything that I'd learned over the 3 years at Total Amber, the year or so before at New Horizons, put it all together. And I just understood everything about the niche markets that Phase 3 operated in as we obviously first began, which were essentially kind of HR and payroll. The model was bums on seats, kind of contractors, pay them 400, charge 500, 600, that kind of model. I understood the market enough to talk the talk. I couldn't walk the walk because I wasn't a contractor. I wasn't a consultant. I didn't understand HR systems or payroll systems. But then that's where my relationships with the consultants came in, and they would attend meetings with me, or they would speak to customers with me, for me in some cases. And I think going out and doing it is still the number one approach. You've got to be fearless. I was young at the time. Doesn't mean you have to be young, obviously, to start a business. And I still have customers and clients, consultants from the early days of Phase 3, so kind of 19, 20 years ago. I'm still in contact with them. I still pick up the phone. Some of them are still working with us, which is ridiculous, really, to think, if you think about it.
That's always a good sign, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I won a lot of business just because I built relationships with both customers and consultants, and that is absolutely key. I think it's a skill that's often forgotten about, rapport building, relationship building, but in every element of every function of every business, it's about the relationships you build both internally and externally.
I really like that. And just to help me, because it'll also help our listeners. So the early, Phase 3, that sort of version 1, if you like, you mentioned, so it was contract recruitment, but it sounds like you had almost, from day one, you were positioning it as a consultancy, to your point, that margin. Is that right? You would say, well, look, these are Phase 3 people, as opposed to, we at Phase 3 recruit contractors for you. How was that?
Yeah, we were positioning it as consultancy, but we were using contractors. But the contractors would 9 times out of 10 only be working with me. We had no IR35 or anything ridiculous, obviously, in those days. And they would, in some cases, they had a Phase 3 email address, and they'd literally work 48, 49 weeks of the year just for me, whether it's at one customer, whether it's at 25 different customers. So they may as well have been employed, but there were actual contractors. Because at that point, I didn't understand or know the kind of employed FTE marketplace. I just went with what I knew. And yeah, so we were kind of masquerading as a consultancy, I suppose, but without actually being a pure consultancy.
No, it's a great model, and I've had other guests who built firms, sold firms, to your point, largely based on that kind of contractor model. And just because this will inform my next question, was that the model Total Amber had? So had you seen that model?
Yes.
Was Total Amber okay?
Yeah.
So you would.
Yeah.
So that was, I was going to ask if they were a recruitment firm, how did you kind of learn that model? But to your point, if they were that model, you then kind of were billing yourself out in that way. I think there's an interesting piece, again, in this for, others listening, of right now, you run a big organization. It's clear you've got credibility in the space. Back then, again, you were one guy on his own with a mobile phone. And you alluded to it, I think, a bit with bringing colleagues and contractors in. But how did you build that and demonstrate that credibility so early on when, it was just you in your kind of spare bedroom at your parents' house? How did you get those early clients to believe in you enough that you could, solve those problems and give them the consultants to help?
I think it's about the value that you add, or the perceived value that you add. We talked earlier about getting sales calls at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, dinner time, this, that, and the other. If you've got a roof that's leaking, and you get a sales call at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock about someone actually total fluke that they can fix your roof, all of a sudden, your interest is piqued because it's something that's going to offer or potentially offer you value. And it's exactly the same here. I'd only operate in a small market. There was probably 400 or 500 customers using a particular type of HR software at that point. And I knew every single thing about that market. Yeah, I'd speak to the consultants, I'd speak to the contractors, what are the latest upgrade plans, what's the latest enhancements, what are the latest modules that are being released, when's the cutoff date for this release and this update, all of that kind of stuff. And I'd use that information to add value to the customers that we were speaking to. And I think, you need a bit of luck. As much as I'd like to say it was all on me, the reality is you need your first customer. You need your second, you need your third. And then from that, you can build and people speak to each other, particularly in small, niche, incestuous marketplaces. And I think that looking back, that's probably how I got people to trust me, because A, I was honest and upfront with them. B, I understood the market and I knew what I was talking about, and my team, the consultants, knew what they were talking about. And I think people liked me. It's a very underrated skill. Get someone to like you, particularly in those early days.
Well, I like you say, it's underrated, but it is critical. Is people, businesses are just that, and even tech businesses. You look at Twitter or X, as we now call it. The amount of people who've left that platform because of Elon Musk running it. That's nothing to do with the tech. And I know that my friends who have liked Twitter might disagree, but ultimately it's the same thing. It's just run by a different human who they now dislike. And so I think your point's really key there, Assad. And I like what you say. Your roof point is spot on, isn't it? It's actually, I always say this to friends, why do estate agents in London letterbomb you for, how many times do you sweep? And I'm sure it's the same in Manchester. How many times are you sweeping things off your front door from estate agents? But the one time you want to sell your house, you pick up the phone. And actually, I guess that comes back to your point of process, doesn't it? Is understanding that's part of the process, not rejection. It's just timing.
Yeah. And I think it's mindset, isn't it? If you're going into this thinking that every single call you make is going to result in a conversation, let alone somebody wanting to work with you, then you need to manage your expectations, because that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen unless, of course, you are perhaps Elon Musk, in which case probably everyone wants to speak to you. But certainly not everybody wanted to speak to me. And I had people put the phone down on me, and I had people say, we're not working with you. We're only going to work with a vendor, because we're obviously pitching ourselves as more affordable than the vendor, as independent. And, we guaranteed quality and continuity, all this kind of stuff that the vendors at that time couldn't guarantee. So we made a lot of enemies in terms of the vendors. They hated us. These same vendors we partner with now. So it's kind of gone full 360, It's bizarre, but we needed an edge. We needed a story. We needed something to get us off the ground. And that was our story, yeah.
Well, it makes so much sense. And like you say, I said, that evolution, and we'll talk all about the evolution of phase 3. And that as you grow, your positioning changes, the value to the marketplace changes. And like you say, when you're 5 of you, the vendor might not want to partner. When there's over, 100, 150 of you, suddenly they do. But I think it's a really powerful point, for people listening as well, because in our industry, yes, because of the, to your point, expectation managing, people get uncomfortable with sales. And I suspect some of it is what you've touched on. They expect everyone should want to work with them. My world's marketing, and, I'll have people say to me, well, shouldn't marketing bring us, new business all the time? And actually, like you said, if it did, I'd be doing their business because it'd be that easy, but that's not how the world works. And I think that understanding those expectations is really powerful. I guess you touched on something that I thought was interesting, because it's true around that luck piece. And I'll ask it, but it might be luck, it might be judgment. Were there any things you did in those kind of first few years of phase 3 that, those pivotal moments, things that had a massive, disproportionate impact on the business, either good or bad, be it luck, or as I say, be it judgment that, you had to respond to something?
Oh, wow. I mean, I had a lot to learn very, very quickly in terms of working on the business versus working in the business. There was when I started, Nick, I didn't even know what VAT was. I sent invoices to customers, or actually a contractor sent me an invoice and it had VAT on it, and I'm like, what are you charging me an extra 17.5% for here? Obviously 17.5% in those days, and he had to explain to me what it was, and then I had to obviously learn that and this and the other. But in terms of pivotal moments, I think for me, my first employee and getting a couple of people into the business was obviously crucial. Not too long after I launched, obviously, 3 or 4 years later, we had the whole kind of credit crunch recession of 2008, 2009. So that was pivotal. We had to ride our luck and work our way through that. But I think all of these things are challenges you have to accept. You can't run away. You can't turn your back on these things, and we use that to our advantage in that, okay, you still need to implement a system. You still need to make enhancements. You still need to do something with your HR payroll tech. Now that you have less funds in the account, Mr. Public Sector Council, why not work with us? Because we are more affordable. You can get 2 of our consultants for the same price as 1 consultant from the vendor and all of this kind of stuff. So I think in terms of pivotal moments in the early days, getting that first employee, because it just for me to prove that, I now employ somebody, that can be a model. And I think obviously things that were totally out of our control, like, recession, credit crunch, was absolutely crucial to us. Moving forward a little bit, so kind of we're now perhaps year 7 or year 8 into the business, I landed quite a big kind of partner deal, which I suppose on reflection actually slowed down our longer term growth, because the value of this deal over time was pretty big. And it was kind of, we were like 75, 80% of our business was this one deal with a ton of contractors working for the vendor, basically. It was great for me personally from a finance point of view or for the business, but actually it slowed down our growth, because if that had not happened, I think we could have been 4 or 5 years ahead of where we are today. I always say I think we're kind of 5 to 6 years behind where I would like the business to be, but that's just my mindset. And as great as that relationship was with that vendor, and revenue was fantastic and margin was brilliant, it kind of overtook us as a business, and we didn't have space or capacity to do anything different and to grow quicker. So then that came to an end after 5 years, 6 years or so, and then we kind of moved and progressed the business forward. So I think to answer your question in terms of pivotal moments and challenges, I think they were certainly the first few in the kind of first five, maybe 6, 7 years.
Well, some great examples there, Assad. And I think your point, particularly around the recession, given, where we are at the moment, is just a great reminder of shape what you do and say to the world we're in. Like you say, when times are lean, you get more of our consultants. When times are good, there's, I'm sure, a different version of the pitch that works just as well. I'd love to, though, because you touched on the fact that deal slowed your business down. That feels very, I guess, counterintuitive. I've sat in meetings like this or like panels and events where people say the best thing you can do is get a partner deal or, get a big deal. And obviously 80% of your business with one client probably meant some sleepless nights. But
yeah.
why did it slow you down? Because on the face of it, you'd say, well, that's sped you up. That's grown your business by 80%.
The issue we had, there was 3 of us in the business at this point. There was me and two employees. And all of our time was spent servicing this customer, this one partner. And yeah, we had 10, 20% of our business was elsewhere at the time as well. But we didn't want to let it go because it was worth so much to us in terms of pounds and pence. But we weren't in a position to spend the time to then plan to see what we can do with all of a sudden the bank balance is looking good. What do we do next? Where is our next partner? This model has worked so well. Let's go and speak to another 10 partners and, see if we can get another 2 or 3. It just took up so much time, effort, resource. And I suppose it was, if I'm being totally honest, my naivety and thinking, oh, look, I've got suddenly 3 of us and we're doing, I think 3-point-something million in revenue and a ridiculous margin of 3 people,
That's a pretty good margin for employees, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I got a bit too comfortable thinking, I suppose, not I've made it, but I probably got a bit cocky. If I'm being totally honest, you've got to be honest with yourself, haven't you? I probably got a bit cocky and I didn't then do what I should have done until that partnership came to an end, and the partnership spanned 5 years. So that's why I say I think it slowed us down. And obviously the flip side of that is we benefited hugely and were then able to make decisions later on down the line with a level of financial freedom, which is obviously crucial in any business. But I think whilst we were in it, it just slowed us down a touch.
Oh, it's a really good point, as and comes back to something actually you mentioned earlier around learning to work on and in the business, because that example sounds like because of the size, etc., you were so much in the business, you couldn't work on, and as you were, you very honestly shared, you're kind of also comfortable with that, so you're not looking out. It's the old, I don't know if you've read the book Who Moved My Cheese. It's that kind of, you're not looking for the next one. You're not looking for where's the next deal if you're always working on the main one, and it's just a really interesting, I think, story for anyone else listening, because I'm sure some people would see that as that golden kind of goose, but actually, like you say, having now sat there, however many years later, actually what seemed great at the time has potentially held you back 5 years in your view, which is a really interesting perspective.
I will add to that as well, that you don't know what you don't know either at that point. If I'd have been surrounded by people who had grown similar or similar types of businesses, and they were advising me and mentoring me in terms of, all right, great, you've got this now, brilliant, this is what you need to do next, or why don't you plan this, why do you do that it might be a different story. But I didn't have that kind of that circle at that time either.
Well, that I think gives us a nice chance to jump to today and kind of accelerating that journey, because like I said, we've talked about, it sounds like, up to the first 7 years. We've got 13 more to cover, and we'll try and highlight some of the key bits. And maybe the start to this is when we talked about sort of where you are today, you called it like version 3 of phase 3. To help our listeners and kind of place some of those bits we've just talked about, how do you delineate those? What was sort of 1 to 2 to 3? And then we can dive into some of the differences.
Okay. So I think version 1.0 of phase 3 is everything we've just discussed up to date, really, kind of the bums on seats, niche recruitment, keep costs low, 2, 3, 4 employees, and, think we're the best thing since sliced bread, which we clearly weren't. Version 2.0, I'm not sure if there's a time where you can actually say we're now out of 2.0 and we're into 3.0, but we're certainly planning 3.0 and we're in and around 3.0. But version 2.0 is when we grew our internal team. We started to provide services rather than providing people. We added services, so things like managed payroll services and outsourced payroll. We expanded our market into, so we historically have been HR payroll, we're now finance as well. We started building the recurring revenue in the business, the ARR, and building out functions within the team. So, we now have a HR team, we have customer success, we have finance, we have professional services, managed services, so on, and marketing, sales, so on and so forth. And it was very much a growing phase, basically, version 2.0. Version 3 will obviously be a growth stage as well, but it's more around digital transformation. It's about meeting very big revenue targets and 5-year plans, obviously numbers of employees, and we're now a metrics and kind of KPI driven organization. Really, we have God knows how many reports that we look at on a monthly basis around kind of EBITDA and utilization and marketing stats. So you'll probably know your MQLs and all this kind of stuff. So that is it's part of version 2.0, but it's going to continue into 3.0, which will be our real kind of, we're now ready to achieve everything we want to achieve. The functions are there, and we've kind of created a model where we've gone first with creating the structure within the business. And now as hopefully revenue and margins grow, people come in, we can just slot them into the right function. The right processes are already in place, with tweaking, of course, as you need to.
That is a really succinct overview, Assad, and I think gives us some great topics to jump into, because again, like we talked about with other areas of your journey, that these are things I am hearing other consultancies talk about or want to do, and there's lots of noise in the market. And maybe we start with the V1 to 2, because you mentioned you're in this world where actually you had a business that was going great, you're making, decent margin. You also presumably had little risk, because if they're contractors and they get let go, like, your risk is your 3 employees, not your X hundred contractors. And I'd love to understand, and I don't know if it all happened at once, and you can tell me, like, what was it that made you say, actually, right, we're going to go into these other service lines? So like manage payroll, which not only is a different business, but it's also a different business model, as I understand it. Like lower, it's a volume play, it's not a margin play. You mentioned around building ARR. So what led you to really look to grow out those different offerings? Because they're very different. It's not like saying we're doing HR contractors and then we're doing finance contractors. Payroll, for instance, different world. What made you take the challenge?
So we got to a point and I wanted to feel that I was running a proper business. And there's no definition of a proper business, is there? Of course not. But in my mind, it was one that had a number of employees and that offered a lot more. And ultimately, that wasn't overly dependent on me, a key man or whatever the term is you want to call it. And as I brought people into the business, you bring ideas into the business, don't you? You bring knowledge, and people have done something elsewhere, and different conversations start to happen. And that's really where the ideas for different services came into play. Obviously, there's a margin point there, isn't there? The contractor market is safe, but obviously the margin for your employed resources is significantly higher. So that then felt to me like the opportunity to really grow out our internal team. Things like managed payroll, again, you speak to people, you go to events or whatever it is, and you understand the model around ARR and recurring revenue, what that actually could mean for your business moving forward. And that is, I suppose, what really helps us to make those decisions.
And within the things you chose, what was it that made you go for, because I can completely agree on the, say, ARR point. What was it that made you go for, let's take managed payroll? Because, and I, again, to make it so the sort of why I'm asking this makes sense. It feels like while it's in HR, it's quite a shift. You did complex HR system transformation. Some might look at this and say payroll is a very different function within HR. So why was it payroll that kind of you said, yeah, actually, this is something we could really add value to our clients in?
Well, we used to implement payroll systems as well. It wasn't just HR. So there was a natural kind of fit there as well. And then obviously payroll, there's a obvious link with HR, and there's an obvious link with finance. That debate rumbles on, doesn't it? Should payroll sit in HR or finance or standalone or whatever? But I just think that we had the capabilities and the resources to be able to do it. Customers were asking us, do you provide this service as well? You've implemented this service for us, but do you provide managed services or part managed or fully outsourced, and the various different models within payroll? And so we thought, you know what, we can make this work. Let's give it a go, basically. And we started, make sure I get my dates right now, probably 3 or 4 years ago. We won kind of payroll awards for our service. We're on various frameworks. We've got some fantastic customers, and it has grown beyond what we thought it would grow in terms of the speed of which we thought it would grow. Our plan is to have kind of a 50-50 business in terms of 50% managed services and 50% professional services. We're not quite there yet, but obviously you win a few big professional services projects, and the ratios kind of tip in PS's favor a little bit. But that's our long-term plan, and I genuinely think it's one of the best decisions we have ever made. I say we because it's not always me. Best decisions we have ever made at Phase 3 is to start a managed service side of the business, because there's a natural flow on there as well. We help customers to select the system. We then help them implement the system, and we then help them manage the system. It may not be managed payroll, it may be sysadmin or something like that. But the whole process now, from start to end, we can support on the customer's journeys.
When you explain it like that, it makes perfect sense. And I think, to your point, and as much for anyone listening, like you say, it really is just looking at that value the value the customer needs, and where can you provide that. And it sounds like in your case that the customers were coming to you, and it was a natural fit. you touched on something, and this is where I'd be interested how you structured the business. You mentioned earlier, like the goal of phase two was so you weren't a key man, if you like, a key person in the business, and obviously you are a key person, but you weren't sort of doing everything. How did you and the team set up, or how have you structured managed services to be able to achieve that scale without, you having to do 2 day jobs and getting no time to see, friends, family, working weekends? How did you set that up to be managed internally as much as externally?
It's a very good question. And I think it goes back to the point we touched upon earlier. And I'll probably refer back to this quite a few times throughout the remainder of this podcast. Because I'm not a consultant, I've had to rely upon the amazing input of my colleagues. So the payroll managed service function is run by, well, obviously we have a head of professional services, we have a COO James, and obviously then the payroll team underneath all of that. That is a structure that we have. Obviously have BD and sales selling into it, marketing, obviously providing the overviews and all the marketing stuff around it. But because I haven't had the experience of previously running a payroll managed service or being a payroll consultant myself, I've had to rely on other people. And what that then does is it takes you out of the equation, because I can look at it and think, okay, well, that part doesn't make common sense to me or business sense, and that's the value I can add. I can't add the value in terms of the framework around payroll or the accreditations we have to go through or annually and all of that side. So I'm relying on my team to do that. And I think that then creates longevity within the team. It creates loyalty, trust, and all of these key attributes that you need in any business, but particularly one where the owner, for want of a better term, or founder like myself, can add limited value to certain areas. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I've answered your question there or not, but
no, it makes a lot of sense, Assad. And I think to your point, it's that relying on people, not being the smartest in the room, if you like, or finding people who are smarter than you in those areas. I guess it does lead to an extension of that question. And again, this will be something I'm sure others listening might think of. What you said makes perfect sense. It then relies on you recruiting the right people. And there's a really interesting question in there of how do you, and I know it's more than just you in the business, like how can you make sure you're recruiting the right people? Because to your point, if you're not a payroll expert, how do you know what to ask to know if you've got the best payroll expert, if that makes sense?
That's what the team are there for. That's what the team are there for. I try and jump on as many interviews as I can because I think I'm quite a good judge of people. I may not be able to judge them based upon their experience within payroll or HR or finance, but just in terms of speaking to people. So obviously the head of payroll or head of managed services would be responsible for the recruitment process. What I did in the early days is I recruited people that I thought could fit the bill. And I was again, I refer back to luck and destiny. I'm a big believer in destiny, by the way. So some of the people I recruited, some of the very few, within the first 10, 15 recruits within phase 3, still with us today, including James, who's my COO, who started as a contractor. Started as a contractor, then became a consultant, an employed consultant, head of this, director, and now he's COO, and probably 50%, or just over 50% of our management team all started in the same way. So we've got a mix of people that have been brought in for specific roles, like marketing and things that we didn't have, so we couldn't grow them ourselves. But in terms of professional services, managed services, our COO, customer success, these are all homegrown, and I love that fact. I love the fact that we can offer someone the opportunity to start within a business and 7-8 years later, you can be a COO, Now that's very much on the individual as well as me and phase 3, of course. But these are the key individuals that are on a day-to-day basis running phase 3. I have absolute trust and faith 100% in them to make the right decisions. Just to go back in terms of your question, how do you ensure you recruit the right people? I think that's the hardest thing in business. The hardest thing in business is the people, because look after your people and they'll look after your business and all this kind of stuff that we see on LinkedIn all the time. Maybe cliched, but it's absolutely 100% spot on as well. And I think we're going to touch upon this later on as well, where we probably rushed a few recruits when we kind of grew a bit too fast, but we're now very much taking our time. And it's the biggest advice I can give to anybody is try and recruit the best people you can afford at that particular time, because not underestimate the importance of having the right people in your business.
I think great advice, Assad. And to your point, and I want to move us there fairly quickly because the culture piece obviously is why we met. Your point around the board, I'm fascinated in, how you've created a culture that brings people through. So I probably only have one more question on that sort of V1, V2, V3 piece. And it is in part to bring in our friend who I introduced at the start and have kept hidden, because there was something, and I'll ask it and you can place the two different parts. Because when we spoke ahead of this conversation, you kind of just made a passing comment that actually you'd run the business for a long time without a plan or kind of a documented plan. You obviously had a vision for it. And you touched on V3. You're now looking at 5-year plans. You're now looking at metrics. And this is where enter Joe Omani, who listeners to this show will know, many people know in the consulting industry, obviously an expert in consulting. I think the only professor in the world on consulting, which I think is a great accolade to have.
Oh, you're going to give him a big head now. His head's already too big as it is.
Well, I'll let you guys chat about that at the next board meeting. But it would be great to understand, to your point, like, where did those two things enter? Was it you knew you needed expertise, so Joe came? Was it you wanted to do a plan and then that plan led to Joe? How did that happen, and why, I guess, in the first place, did you decide, right, we're now having plans? Because that sounds like quite a shift from where you were.
Well, I think to answer that, I need to go back to the beginning, and my naivety, I think, is the reality here. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I just repeated what I'd done previously. I looked at the numbers and I was content. Looking back, had I had a mentor at that stage or a business partner or an advisor, I didn't think I needed one. But hindsight's a great thing, yeah? And we got to a stage, or I also I'll just say, I never thought I needed a plan in any element of my life as well. I think, it's difficult to separate your everyday non-work life with your work life, isn't it? I think that's just how I'm wired.
And when you say, just to define it for our listeners, because you mentioned about destiny, when you say plan, is that kind of a lower level? Like, it sounds like you always had a vision or a destiny of, like, I will be here. But was it more that kind of, right, on Wednesday, I'm going to do this, on Thursday, I'm going to do that, just again to paint the leveling?
Well, not so much the Wednesday, I'm going to do this, Thursday, I'm going to do this. I think more the 12-month plan. This is where I want to be 12 months from now, and this is what I'm going to do to get there. I always had a kind of framework that I worked within. So, this is how many calls I'm going to make. And every day I'd write down, I'd prep everything I'm going to do in my journal. I've got probably 56, God knows how many journals in my loft upstairs. But I never had anything any more structured than that and long-term. So nothing 12 months, nothing 5-year, no long-term planning. Things changed so fast in those early days as well. I never understood the concept of a 5-year plan, because things were changing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. What's the value in, 48 plus months from now? It didn't make any sense to me. But I think my outside of work life was like that as well. It's not wide like that, pretty instinctive. I think I work better when the pressure is on. In the last minute, cramming my revision for GCSEs and A-levels, I crammed the notes and stuff for this meeting, to be fair, until this morning.
It's going all right so far.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
Right.
A lot of it's kind of autopilot, I think. But I did know that I wanted to achieve something, and I did know I wanted to be successful in whatever I did. That came from my upbringing, my family. I've told you, my father, a wider extended family, all run their own businesses. So I always knew I was going to do something like that. I also appreciate that success means different things to different people. But in those early days, if I'm being totally honest, it meant probably pounds and pence to me. I think a lot of people would probably say that in their 20s. I work a lot with my gut feeling. And I think maybe you have to go through that to come out the other end to see what the reality actually is, which is why now we have a board. And obviously Joe is a very big part of that. We had other advisors in the past who helped us formulate our 5-year plan. The chap who helped us do that is the CEO of a multi-billion-pound organization now, So there's a lot that has changed, within me as I'm learning and progressing. But yeah, planning has never been my strong point, but I absolutely would recommend it to anybody starting out. I'm not saying my ways, there is no right and wrong in anything really, but it's, I certainly advocate for planning now.
Well, there's something interesting in there, again, to your own kind of development as a leader. How did you get comfortable with that? Because to your point, if you've always been someone who doesn't plan, how have you got comfortable and keen to use plans? Because sometimes that can just be, a bit of a tissue rejection if it's like an organ donation. Kind of like, I just don't get plans. How have you got yourself to be able to love 5-year plans? As the man who hated 12-month plans 20 years ago, how have you got to that point?
I don't think I'd say I love 5-year plans, but I understand.
Sorry, I put words in your mouth.
Yeah. No, I understand the necessity of that now from a business our size and scale to be able to achieve what it is you want to achieve. Every area of the business needs to understand what they're doing in the next 12, 24, 36 months to be able to get there. We now have 5-year plans. We have 90-day plans as well. So every quarter, we'll upload that to our kind of internal system and stuff. And everybody can see what every function is working on for the next quarter, for the next 90 days. So we really break it down for the team as well. And then you combine the two, and that's your 12-month. And then obviously the longer term 5-year one as well. We're kind of a year and a half into it. But I would also advocate, it's not a case of here's your 5-year plan and you can't touch it again. Things are still going to change. 5 years is a long time. So be prepared to amend that plan as required as well. But I'd probably say I'm more a fan of the 90-day plan than I am of the 5-year plan still, because just in my mind, that just makes more sense. It's there, it's tangible. It's only 90 days. It's only 3 months. You can achieve something there. Whereas 5 years from now, so much is going to change that it's almost kind of feels like it could be a bit of a waste.
No, I get what you mean. I can't remember whose quote it is, but it always stuck with me of most people overestimate what they can do with a year and underestimate what they can do in 10, for the reason you say is kind of actually 5 years, 10 years, how much has changed? 5 years ago, we didn't even know there was a pandemic. Now look where we are.
Exactly my point, Nick. Yeah.
That can, and I love what you're saying, Assad, about the kind of 3-month plans. And I think a nice point to actually bring us to culture, because you touched on there, and it sounds like you've got a very open, transparent culture on every, if every department knows what they're doing and everyone else, they can help each other. And you mentioned earlier around 50%, I think you said, your management team have kind of grown up through the business. So maybe to open this section, it'd be great to get your perspective on kind of how you see your culture and what you've done to build that in the way that you have.
The number one priority at phase 3 is culture. And I wrap that up in terms of empathy for your team, putting your people first, not pretending to put your people first, actually putting your people first, continually enhancing, cultivating your approach to people, particularly us, where we're a people business. There's no product as such that we sell. There's no tech. It's our service, our time. So you have to have a real willingness to want to understand your people, what they want, how they work, how you can support them. You may not even agree with it some of the times, but you have to prioritize it. It's like I said earlier, look after your people and they'll look after your business. There's no end point to this. You have to imagine thinking, right, we're going to put our people above our profit in the business, right? That's painful to some people. And but that's the mindset you need to have, I think, to have a truly people first, culture led approach. I think I have to mention, I can't talk about phase 3 without mentioning our former MD, a lady called Kate Wadia, who again started off as a client actually many, many years ago. And then I recruited her into the business and she started it. Anyway, long story short, she ended up as our MD, tragically passed away a few years ago now from ill health. However, Kate Wadia was the lady who really taught me everything there is to know about treating your people well and the culture of your team. she would put everybody first, often to the detriment of herself. And I'm nowhere near the same level as Kate. I can guarantee you that. But I'm trying to understand, to try and put our people first at every opportunity. And it gets harder the bigger you get, without a shadow of a doubt. You know, a 30-man operation cannot be the same as a 100-man operation. My team are sick and tired of me saying that same phrase to them, but it's true. And why would you want to be? You wouldn't get to 100 if you wanted to be a 30-man operation. Yeah, you know. So it's something Joe says actually that a lot of people often get to 100, 110, 20, and then scale back again because they don't like it. You know, but we make mistakes in perhaps an initiative we put in place, or we might think everything's going really well from a culture point of view, but actually we made wrong decisions around things and people get upset. But you're never going to keep everybody happy either. So again, it's managing that. But yeah, I think, you know, we've always been a people first. You talked about great places to work. We were delighted to be on the top 100 list there. And it is something it comes from the very top. From me, James, and the SLT, senior leadership team, and all the way down, we try and get the right feel for culture, and we want everyone to try and adopt and stuff. And there's perks and stuff and initiatives, but I think more than anything, it's putting your people first and having a real empathy and trying to walk in their shoes, basically.
Well, I think really powerful to hear, Assad, and very sorry to hear about Kate. And I'm keen to touch on a lot of the advice she obviously shared with you, because she had a huge impact by the sounds of it. And it's interesting. Firstly, you're not alone in that 30 and 100 comment. The consultancy I used to work at, the former managing partner there, Mohammed Mansour, I remember him getting on stage every company meeting and said some variant of, we wouldn't want to work how we did, when we were 20, now we're 50, or, different numbers. But I think you're spot on. I shamelessly rob it for my own team as well. So if anyone on my team are listening, they probably hate me hearing it as well.
Just to expand on that though, Nick, as well. We when we were 20, 30, even 40, everybody knew everybody's partner's name, pet, dog, cat, children, all of that. And obviously this is pre-COVID as well, where we've always been kind of work from home in a way, but people used to still come into the office quite regularly. So you see people, you talk to people more, you meet every new employee. And it really helped. And that, our culture was kind of something everyone used to talk about. Now that we're remote, fully remote first, and the team is so big, there's still people within the business I've never met, that have been with us a month, 2, 3. I'll maybe see some of them at Christmas party and stuff in a few weeks' time. But how do you deal with that then? How can they feel the same warmth and glow and culture that everybody else felt in the early days? And that is the trick, because whoever can nail that has got the most amazing business out there. And we haven't nailed it yet, but we're getting there.
Well, and I think to your point, so that evolution, that people join those different businesses for those different reasons. Just as you said, Joe talked about different entrepreneurs and people running consultancies wanting different size. I guess, someone joins a 10-person business in certain ways to be not in a 100-person business. And actually, it sounds like what you've achieved, into your point of cracking it, you've created a culture that lets people grow with the firm, or that the culture doesn't feel too dissimilar. And you mentioned, and just because I really like this kind of putting people first piece of your culture, you touched on earlier, like actually some of the things you're doing, you may not agree with exactly what people want. And I always find that the people debate can become quite polarizing, because some people think culture is kind of just giving someone everything they want, and it's all snowflakes, versus the other side. If you look at the investment banks, it's like be at your desk and work for 20 hours a day and then take your bonus, and that's your goal. I don't know if there's any specific examples that jump out for you, but kind of how do you balance, those two tensions of having a really happy team and giving the team, your team, that culture, and the kind of commercial aspect? How have you had to do things you don't want to give the culture while retaining the growth you've achieved?
It's a really good question. And I'll be candid and honest enough to tell you that it's been one of the issues that we've struggled with the most, because we almost have to go into reverse gear. Because all of a sudden, things like utilization are being measured. So, for example, you have a utilization target, which maybe 3-4 years ago you never had. And people are thinking that now it's Big Brother spying on us, and this isn't the company I joined, and so on. So you have to be, again, you've got to be open, you've got to be honest, you've got to explain to the team how all of this adds up in terms of where they sit within the business, what impact their role has on others. If they're not utilized at the target level, then that has an impact on the amount of money coming into the business. If that then has an impact on, cash flow, which then has an impact on doing all the nice things we want to do, and I think it has been tough, but I'm confident that the people who want to understand and want to grow with your team will always make the effort and will always understand. And you'll always have a few who perhaps don't care and are literally there for the paycheck each month. And you know what? That's absolutely fine as well. I don't think you have to have everybody bought into your journey or this, that, and the other, because everyone's priorities are different. Some people can't work extra hours. Some people love the fact that we have unlimited holidays. Some people don't like it because they can only ever go because they've got children and they can only ever go in the summer holidays where the prices are double or treble. So my point is, you're never going to get everybody happy, but you have to try, Nick. The trick is you've got to keep on cultivating. You've got to keep on going out there, listening to people, the pulse surveys that we do on a monthly basis, listening to what do people want? How do people want to be communicated to? How do people want to be spoken to? How do people, what initiatives do they want to see in place next? And sometimes you might get something daft like a rotisserie chicken machine in the office kitchen.
Do you have one of those?
We don't, no, thank God. But and I know someone put that down as a joke comment and stuff like that. But you're never going to please everyone, but you have to keep on trying.
No, I think it's a great philosophy to your point, Assad. And I guess that acceptance, isn't it? It's you're not going to 100% in anything in life is impossible. But if you're trying for 100, you'll get close. I was reading an article this morning that was talking about the British cycling team, and everyone, most people know the story of their kind of 1% gains. But it's to your point, as long as you're trying to get better, things will just keep him. You're going in the right direction. And there was something in what you said. I want to come back to the pulse surveys momentarily, but something struck me in what you said around that kind of how you communicate with people. And there sounds like a real honesty in what you're saying, in terms of how you're communicating. So to your point with utilization, it's not about Big Brother or not. It's about helping the team understand why those things matter. And to your, I guess, treating people like adults is, okay, if we don't ensure everyone is utilized at X, the business doesn't make money. And at some point that means we can't have as many people or parties, or is that kind of the approach that has been twinned with that? Is that kind of always doing better and just always being more honest? Or I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
It has to be the only way. I think you have to be as upfront and as honest as you can with a team. My years of experience will tell you that some people will value that. I think the majority of people will value that. Some people won't care, again, which is absolutely fine. But you shouldn't move away from what you think is the right way of dealing with people. And I think that's the only way, because you have to treat people like adults. You have to treat people like grown-ups. Now, I say that, and I will also say that you get to a certain size and scale, and you can't share everything with everybody either. Because A, why would you? B, not everybody needs to know everything. And C, in some cases, it may just put them off. They might get, we've got a bit of a cash flow problem. The wording cash flow problem, am I going to get paid? Am I going to get paid on time? So you don't need to worry people unnecessarily either. But I do think that ultimately, if you treat people like that, then you will get, it's reciprocal, isn't it? You'll get that back in return, which then helps and aids the growth of the culture that you want to create within the business.
Yeah, and your point there as well around being careful with as much what you share as how you share it, because to your point, as you and the leadership team running the business, cash flow is something you deal with day in, day out. It's not a scary topic, but like you give that example, if you say cash flow and someone's not used to cash flow, they'll think cash flow means no cash, means no pay, means But I completely hear your point of it's the honesty and sharing what you can in a way you can so that people feel brought in. And you touched on pulse surveys, and I wanted to bring it up just because it's live at the moment internally for my business, Assad. So these interviews are as much selfish for me as my listeners. But I just really be interested to understand, when did you bring those in and why? Because again, typically in our industry, Great Place to Work's become quite a big initiative, but that's an annual survey. You say you're surveying people monthly. Someone listening might think, bloody hell, Assad, that's a lot of forms and surveys. And, to your point, are you actually just surveillance, nanny state and all of that? Why do you do them and how did you bring them in? And I guess the obvious extension, what do you get from doing that?
Yeah. So we brought it in a few years ago in terms of our internal HR system, which is something that we implement for our customers as well. And it was a way of understanding. It's totally anonymous, so we don't know who said what. And it was a way of understanding how people are feeling, because we got to a stage where you can't speak to everybody as you used to. Those kind of water cooler conversations, coffee machine conversations don't always happen now. So we have a monthly pulse survey. It's questions about, how do you feel? How do you think you contribute towards the business? Do you feel you know the direction of travel within phase 3 and where we're going? All that kind of stuff. Marked out of 5. And we have reasonably good feedback every single month. Some of the questions may go up and down, but we're constantly above a 4, which is out of 5. So it's obviously very
pretty
high.
good out of 5, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we use that feedback to then discuss, okay, well, if people don't understand the direction of travel for phase 3, let's say for the last 3 months, then we need to communicate that bit better, because clearly 100 people are saying that this is only a 2 out of 5 every month. So that bit needs to be reviewed and looked at. And then how can we communicate the plan better, for example? So it's been really valuable to us in terms of how we do that and the feedback that we get.
That sounds brilliant. And again, practical questions, and this is as much selfish as for our listeners.
Go for it, absolutely.
So am I inferring correctly, you ask the same questions each month? So you don't have to say exactly what they are, but the same 3 or 5. And this might be really specific, but I'm intrigued. Why 5? Why out of 5, not out of 10? Was that a decision or?
That's a really good point. I don't know the answer to that question, if I'm being honest. I think it may just be the way the system is set up, or it may be something we've implemented ourselves, but I don't actually know that level of detail.
Sorry
about that.
As I say, well, no, don't you worry. So we could. I was just intrigued again because I think it's something. I know our listeners are details people. To your point of kind of what do you get if you come from a consulting background? You focus on detail, which can sometimes be, to our point, better or worse. I guess the last piece on culture, because I am mindful of your time, is you touched on, and I just want to make sure I got it right to ask the question. You are now a remote first organization, is that right?
Yep. So we're work from home. We have an office, and people are welcome into the office any day of the week should they wish to. But our contracts are work from home contracts, so remote contracts. And
I infer, it doesn't matter too much, but I infer then that you now recruit, like your team isn't just Manchester based,
anywhere in the UK.
Region based, anywhere.
Yeah.
So then the question, to your point of scale, I always find it, and you might, to what you said around people, you don't know if anyone's got it cracked. You might not say you have, but how do you foster that culture in a remote first organization where, today I'm in my kind of study, you're in your study. It's great when you're chatting, but otherwise it feels quite isolating. How have you created that in a world where you can't just bring everyone to the office on a Wednesday?
With difficulty is the honest answer. We have teams within teams, and we encourage these teams to get together as often as possible. There's some people who may be Southeast based, so they're welcome to, jump into a Regis or whatever it may be to get together and go out for drinks and food and coffees and work together or whatnot. And then what we do is we say, okay, Wednesday is the day most people will be in the office. But again, it's more of a social space. So when you come in, there's so many people, it's actually then hard. If you're going to come in and just sit on Teams calls all day, what's the point of coming in the office? You might as well do that at home. So we have our phase 3 birthday anniversary party each year. We have a summer party. We have a Christmas party. Those 3 are fixed. No matter what happens, we get the whole team or as many of the team together as possible then. And then they can come to the office and, people are there for each other. within their teams, they have the option to get together whenever they want as well, whether that's office based or external based. But it is difficult because not everybody. We've got to a stage now. I don't think this is just at phase 3, where people are so comfortable at home. It's become a habit, and I don't necessarily think it's a good habit. Personally, that's just my personal belief. I think everything I've talked about today in terms of, communication and relationship building or rapport, all of that happens better face to face. I'll argue till the cows come home with anybody if they try to sell the idea that you can create a better relationship remotely with somebody. I don't think you can. I think you can still create a relationship, but it won't be as solid and as sturdy as you can face to face. And it's exactly the same with your internal team. It is really, really difficult. Obviously, communication is key. So actually, very recently this week, we've launched a new communications platform internally. We had like a team WhatsApp group and all these little small initiatives to keep people engaged and involved in the team. But it is tough. It is tough. No doubt about that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I agree with you as well, Assad. You make better relationships in person. As an organization, we've always been 3-2, which COVID was really annoying for, because we were doing it before it was popular, as people say about bands they like. But like you, actually, those bonds are really important, which is why I was fascinated, because there's a lot of organizations now where remote first is the way they're going. And to your point, a lot of the employment market want that. People have got comfortable with being at home, and for some people it really works. We work with a client where the client was London based. A lot of their team was sort of up in some in Yorkshire, some not far from you, but they had kids and other things that meant you weren't traveling to London 5 days a week, but traveling once a month or something. That worked. And I think your point of those little engagement moments of, well, we've got our birthday, we've got our Christmas, etc., makes a lot of sense. I guess, is there anything else that, to your point of the pulse surveys, anything that's come up in them that has helped you improve that remote working? Anything that was unexpected, but actually by doing has really helped improve the remote culture that you're building?
I can't think of any specific kind of levels of feedback that helped us improve something. But I think one point that has always come up, similar to what I just said, is how we communicate with our team. And we've really looked into that. We've looked at kind of culture building platforms, well-being platforms, which also have maybe a financial well-being and a mental well-being tools associated with them, this, that, and the other. And I think, we have a lot of systems, as you can imagine. And I think a lot of people just looked at it as another system, but the way we communicate has probably been fed back to us the most via the pulse surveys, in terms of this needs to be looked at, or how can we improve this, and so on.
Well, and it's a fascinating point, and I think a great lesson for anyone in culture of it's not always what you're saying, it's to your how and how often. And actually, when you're a larger organization, it can become very easy for the people at the top to think they're telling everyone something, because they're talking about, you will talk with with James and your board about certain things day in, day out. But actually, for people who are further down, or for, in different roles in the organization, they don't hear about it. So I think a really great point. But Assad, I think a great place to start to bring us towards the end of today, and appreciate you giving your time in the middle of the day for this as well. The last piece, and you can compare notes on this with Joe, because Joe has actually been on the podcast. So you can compare answers together, and I'll let you decide whether yours are better than his. I won't make judgment. But we have 2 questions that I ask every one of my guests. The first one is about books. I'm going to make this longer than I usually do, more as a caveat, because my last guest, every so often a guest reminds me why maybe I shouldn't pick on books. But the question is, what book or books have you gifted or have had the biggest impact on you, and why? The caveat is, it doesn't have to be books. I've had guests who give YouTubes, podcasts, people, or not people, actually, that's a lie. Podcasts, magazines, gifting people. That's not, that's a different podcast. So for now, I've saved my blushes. What is it for you? Is it books? Is it something else? And what is the thing that you've gifted or had the biggest impact, and why?
Wow. What do I gift? That's a really good question. I can answer the first one, and I'll caveat my answer by saying that I've never been a big reader of books. I've always read, and I like an article more than kind of reading a book as such. But in my early days in sales and stuff, obviously I was told about How to Win Friends and Influence People. I know it's dead obvious one. What's the other one? The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
You'd be amazed
as well.
How few people have read How to Win Friends and Influence People. Well, it is one of the best books ever written, but I'll let you continue.
It's fantastic. And there's now one, I gifted one recently to a member of our BD team. They've added it for the digital age, apparently.
Okay.
Now, I haven't read that version of it, but I've read the original many, many times. And what I find fascinating about these kind of books is that, and again, this might just be my experience, I don't know. They don't actually tell you anything you don't already know, but it's the implementation of it on a regular basis. You know, most people will know when you meet someone, if you want to really focus, look them in the eye. That's not that now, again, this might be my own kind of mindset, but this kind of stuff is really obvious. Really listen to people when they're speaking to you. Well, obviously, but sometimes it's just that reminder, isn't it? And what I always say to people when they read a book like How to Win Friends and Influence People is, if you just remember 5 or 6 key takeaways, key points from that book, then you will have learned a lot. The last book I read, funnily enough, is actually Joe's book on how to scale a business, which is absolutely fantastic, by the way, as well. So that's probably the book I've gifted the most to people. But again, I'm not a big reader of books. I love kind of articles, various topics, not even always business. Could be cars, could be anything, watches, whatever it is.
Well, there's I'll have to introduce fake perfumes. I'll have to. A former guest of mine, James O'Sullivan, runs a firm called Project One, and his 2 shares. He's not a reader either, but were cars and watches on YouTube, and aggregates. Aggregates is a whole nother conversation. But there's a guy who does a fascinating YouTube on aggregates. I'll have to introduce you to compare notes on cars and watches.
Brilliant.
But your point on How to Win Friends and Influence People. So, funnily enough, it's a book that hasn't come up that much. Is one of my personal favorites, like you. And I think you're right, Assad. You know, it was written over 100 years ago, and I quite like the original because I like the quaint examples, you know, the cow with the milk and all of this stuff. But actually it's fundamental basics that just reminding yourself, you know, and your point's really powerful if you've got to implement it. You know, it's like I can read all of the gym routines in the world, but I'm not going to get a 6-pack if I don't go to the gym, you know, or, you know, all of those sort of things. So I think it's a really great example. I'd be fascinated what your colleague thinks of the digital age version and whether that still has the magic. They will be able to tell you. I should also, just because he will love it, Joe's book has come up 2 podcasts in a row, and I think I'm not sort of being specific because I think your episode and the other person's are going to come up concurrently. But yes, having not been mentioned for a while, Joe's book has come up twice. So I will be tapping Joe up for a commission on his book after this.
I think you should. He actually made me purchase a copy. He didn't even send me a free signed copy or anything. Can you believe it? But there you go. That's a different story altogether. But it is actually, it depends what stage of your business you're at, I suppose. But I just found literally every single page fascinating because I've got an interest in it. Obviously, it's very relevant to me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a whole, you know, life philosophy there of you can, if you are interested, you will find it interesting.
Absolutely.
I'm sure a guest of mine once said. And then the last piece, Assad, and this is advice to people who are kind of at different stages in their consulting career. And you, I think, will have a unique perspective on this, having grown up running a consultancy, not having come from a consulting background. So I'm fascinated for your advice here. And you've got 3 people in front of you. One is, I'd call them a graduate. So, you know, it might be someone coming into phase 3 today, fresh out of university. The second, I know them as a manager in consulting terms, but they're kind of that late 20s of their career, you know, 5, 6, 7 years in. They're expert enough. They've got options, but they're not senior. And that third one is someone who is approaching a leadership role. So it could be James, you know, before you made him your COO. And the question is just, what one piece of advice would you give to each of them?
Oh, wow. Okay. What one piece of advice? Okay, so to somebody like a graduate kind of starting out, what would I say? I would say be patient. Don't jump the gun. Learn more about how business actually works, all the different functions, and that you have time on your side you don't need to jump straight into it. That is what I would say. Yeah. And I'd actually use my own experience in that, because I wasn't quite a graduate, but I was, kind of 5-6 years post uni, started phase 3. If I could go back in time, I would possibly delay starting phase 3 and or have some kind of mentor or something alongside me.
We're going to have to do a round 2, Assad, because I'm going to have to ask you, not today because we don't have time, but around that question. That's round 2. We'll put that on the shelf.
Okay.
I'd love to know more.
The manager person, so obviously they would have been in the industry for a while. I'd say pick your industry well. The obvious choice is to go into what you know, leverage your contacts, just manage the risk a little bit. Again, it's not too similar to someone starting out. What's your reason for wanting to go into to stay in consulting or something like that? And then the partner person, I think if someone's at partner level, obviously they've already made it. Continue doing what you're doing. Maybe you're not an equity partner at this stage and you can possibly ask for equity. And if you want to set up your own, then, well, look, you'll know the industry extremely well. By that point, you'll all the know-how, all the clients, all the contacts, etc. So on paper, that leap becomes easier, doesn't it, to set up your own? But it's about why you want to set up your own. I think if you're at partner stage, perhaps it's easier to just have some equity and play it safe a little bit.
There's some great answers in there, and those key bits of advice. To your point of how to win friends and influence people, they stand the test of time. And sometimes it's not that it's obvious, it's that you're hearing it from someone else who has done it, because to your point of showing that those things are the things that helped you get to where you are now with phase 3. So some great advice, I think, to finish on. And then the very last, it's not really a question, but it's more to help you. If anyone listening to this, wants to find out more about yourself, wants to find out more about phase 3, where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch?
Okay, excellent. Well, obviously you could go to our website, which is phase3.co.uk.
And is that number 3 or letter 3?
It's the number 3, yeah. So PHASE number 3.co.uk. You can go to our LinkedIn page. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. And feel free to be in touch with me if there's anything we can help you guys with, or if there's any of your kind of other consulting colleagues looking to have a conversation about anything, always happy to speak to people.
Amazing, Assad. Well, thank you for today. It has been really good to chat, really good to learn more about your culture, your journey, obviously how you know Joe. And I've, as I said, selfishly taken a ton from this, and I know my listeners will as well. So all that's left to say is thank you and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you very much, Nick. Honestly, I've really enjoyed it. Been a big pleasure. Thank you again.
Fantastic, Assad. Thank you. Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful, and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas, and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said, that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage. If you're a consulting firm, they really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.